4천만이 단결했다. 살인정법 당하자.
Democracy has never come easily in any part of the world. History does not forget the blood that has been shed along the way, and we should not forget it either. This history should be expressed from different perspectives so that we may better understand what is happening in the present. In our history, we have had many successful and unsuccessful revolutions, each of which can teach us a lesson in some way. In this video, I want to tell you a story about South Korea, which can be considered a successful example of popular movements. The Korean people, after years of struggle and perseverance, finally achieved what they wanted. On July 9, 1987, millions of Koreans took to the streets to participate in the funeral of Lee Han-yul, who gave his life for the country's democracy. This funeral turned into a revolution in which the Koreans put an end to the 30 years of dictatorship in their country. Lee Han-yul's funeral, a 20-year-old student, became a turning point in Korean history, bringing democracy and freedom to the Korean people. Let's take a look at the hierarchy of Korean revolutions. After the World War II, Korea emerged from Japanese colonization and almost millions of Koreans took to the streets. However, everything did not go according to Koreans' wishes because it was unclear how they wanted to govern the country themselves. This is where different parties with different views but with the same goal of building the country were formed. However, there was a problem amidst all of this. The Cold War had taken shape in the United States and the Soviet Union were not getting along. America tried to distance itself from the leftists and communists, while the Soviet Union was the main supporter of the leftists. As a result, the northern part of Korea fell under Soviet control, while the southern part of Korea came under American control. On May 10, 1947, the first elections were held in South Korea, which declared the formation of an independent government, while North Korea formed the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In 1950, the war between two Koreas began with the support of the United States and Soviet Union, which lasted about 3 years and resulted in about 4 million deaths. It was a war between brothers that never led to reconciliation and unity between two Koreas. After the Korean War, the country became a destroyed and poor country whose first goal was to eliminate hunger. In 1948, Syngman Rhee became the first president of South Korea. He considered himself a liberal and a supporter of democracy, but he militarized Korea and suppressed his opponents. In the end, all these hardships led the people to come to the streets on April 19, 1960, and demand the overthrow of the dictator and the dictatorial regime. On April 26, Syngman Rhee was forced to resign, and the people ended 12 years of democracy. The lesson they learned became a path to future revolutions. Having an independent and free country is only possible by the hands of the people themselves. Interestingly, this democracy did not last long. With the formation of the Second Republic of Korea, which governed between 1960 and 1961, dictatorship was once again shown to the people. The new government saw the army as a threat to its policies and arrested and imprisoned many military personnel on the pretext of supporting the people in the April 19 revolution. These events led to a coup by the military on May 16, 1961, which ended the Second Republic of Korea. Following this coup, a military government was established under the National Reconstruction Supreme Council, which was the only parliamentary government in Korean history. Park Chung-hee was behind all of these events, and this period is known as the Third Republic of Korea. Park Chung-lee was the leader of the National Reconstruction Supreme Council who had taken control of the country. At that time, Korea was extremely poor and the conditions were not good at all, and it can be said that it was heavily dependent on US financial aid. On December 1963, Park Chung-lee dissolved the National Reconstruction Council and established the Third Republic, and he himself was elected as the president in the elections. However, he was not actually elected by the people and had come to power through a coup. In order to regain his popularity, he began modernizing the country and launched a nationwide education program, which even received a widespread support from rural areas. However, Park Chung-lee needed foreign investment and financial resources for the growth and development of the country. Since the US was heavily involved in the Vietnam War at that time and Japan had become a wealthy country, Park Chung-hee went to Japan without considering the people's feelings and requested a loan from them by signing the contract in June 1965. The Korean people despited Japan, which had once taken them as slaves and looted their country, and they said that in terms of this contract, Japan must apologize for the Korean people and pay them compensation for the years of crime, which did not happen. This incident caused thousands of people to take to the streets and demand the overthrow of the government, but Park Chung-lee suppressed the protests and declared military rule. One of Park Chung-lee's major goals was the economic progress of Korea, which was realized over a decade, but at the cost of lives of hundreds of workers and the suffering of Korean people who were only paid a cup of coffee in wages. Many events were happening during this time, and Park Chung-lee was declared the president of the country for the 7th time with electoral fraud, and some high-ranking lawyers resigned in protest. The military was stationed everywhere, including universities, and the conditions became very strict. Finally, on October 17, 1972, Park Chung-hee introduced other changes to the constitution so that direct presidential elections were abolished and one person could become the president of Korea for life. This period was called the Fourth Republic of Korea, or the Yushin government. No political opposition was allowed to operate, and Park Chung-hee won the elections and became the president of the country for 2 terms in the years 1972 and 1978. It's interesting to know that under the pretext of fighting communism, Park Chung-hee's regime arrested and imprisoned all of his opponents, and anyone who disagreed with him for any reason was surely communist and had to be arrested. With the government's increasing strictness and their intrusion into people's private lives, a large opposition front against the government formed, and thousands of people took to the streets every day shouting slogans against the government. As these protests expanded, on January 8, 1974, Park Chung-lee declared a state of emergency, meaning the government had the right to disregard all laws and do whatever they wanted to preserve national security. During this time, even saying one word against the government could get you arrested and imprisoned. With the closure of the political space, many of the opposition went abroad and issued statements from there, calling for the overthrow of Park Chung-hee's government. Western governments, as South Korea was their ally in the Cold War, paid little attention to these movements and suppressions, and on April 9, 1975, 8 of the oppositions were sentenced to death, which may be painful for you to know that in 2007, the government announced that these 8 were completely innocent and were executed. From that time on, rebellions and massive protests against the Park Chung-hee government intensified. On October 26, 1979, Park Chung-hee went to inspect one of the industrial units, and this was the last time he was seen in public, as he was assassinated that night by the head of the intelligence agency, and his 18-year-old rule came to an end. After the overthrow of Park Chung-hee government, the Koreans saw themselves closer to democracy and had more hope. But this hope was not very sustainable. On December 12, 1979, a group of military personnel occupied Seoul again and seized power with a coup. This coup was carried out by an underground and illegal group that had been founded years ago by General Chun Do-hwan. As soon as Chun Do-hwan came to power, he immediately declared a military government, and many famous political figures were arrested and interrogated. After this, the people of Gwangju took to the streets and protested against the central government. The army immediately cracked down on the protests, but 3 days later, even more people joined the wave of protests. The protests escalated into a Cold War between the people and the army, until the army launched another attack on Gwangju with even more force, putting an end to the 10-day-long protests. On September 1, 1980, Chun Do-hwan was elected as the president of South Korea, establishing the Fifth Republic of Korea. The government was a dictatorship and repressive. However, after 7 years, in 1987, an event occurred in Korea that was similar to the recent wave of protests in Iran. There were various student and people's groups at the time who had leftist ideas. Because the South Korean government was at war with North Korea, it considered communist ideas to be the enemy. Therefore, the South Korean secret police arrested those who might have such thoughts. In that same year, the South Korean secret police became suspicious of a student in Gwangju and arrested him. Under police torture, the student was killed by drowning and lung rupture. The police tried to cover up the incident, but due to the various events, the news spread in the media that the police had tortured and killed the student. This infuriated the people and a major uprising against the government began. The government's repressive forces arrested and killed many people, but the protests continued to grow until a massive demonstration in June 1987 was held in protest against the central government. The main core of the protest were students, but alongside them, people from all walks of life had participated, and nearly 1 million people took to the streets. After 19 days of protests, Chun Doo-hwan announced that the direct presidential elections would be held for the first time in 16 years in Korea, and all opposition parties would have the right to participate. From the April 19 revolution to the June democratic movement, the death of 20-year-old Lee Hwan-yeol became a turning point in the history of Korea. His death had a profound impact on the establishment of democracy in Korea. This movement was one of the most successful movements for democracy in the world.